Hey, what's going on guys? I'm Thomas, and if you've been wondering if the new firmware updates for the GH5 and GH5S have fixed the autofocus issues, then this video is probably for you. Initiating firmware 2.6 for the GH5. Initiating firmware 1.4 for the GH5S. I'm going to start things out by saying this. For weddings, when my wife and I are using Panasonic cameras, my wife and I use manual focus about 95% of the time. But there are some points during an event where it's just easier to rely on the autofocus. Let's start things off with some guest shots at a recent ceremony we filmed. So here are some shots that my wife is getting of the guests at the wedding with the GH5 via the Ninja 5. She is using the Samyang 85mm T1.5 center lens, which is a manual focus lens and is typically how we do all of our guest shots at every wedding. So my wife is getting all of the actual shots we will use in the client's film. So while my wife is getting those shots, I'm waiting for the wedding to start, so I set up another GH5 so I can get some autofocus test shots with the GH5's new 2.6 firmware update. For our AF custom settings, I have the speed set to 5 and the sensitivity set to 3. And the newest setting in the 2.6 firmware is the AF AE lock, which we have a few options, but we are going to select AF on far. As you can see, when I first started filming here, the GH5 wouldn't lock on, so I tilted the camera down and back up, and it finally got to subject and focus. I move around and it's pretty good, but then I try to focus on this nice lady in the purple dress and it struggles. So what I decided to do is make my focus box area smaller, and that seemed to make the autofocus lock on a lot quicker. And as you see, I keep going. Okay, the aisle shots during the ceremony are pretty much the only shots I rely on the camera's autofocus for, and I always use the GH5S for these shots, as it seems to have a better autofocus ability than the GH5, but let's see how it does. For these shots, I again have my autofocus speed set to 5 and my sensitivity set to 3. This time we set our AF AE lock to AF on near, as I want my subject to definitely be in focus when they are closer to the camera than when they're far away. When the bride is coming down the aisle, I definitely need this shot to be in focus, so the camera needs to get this one right. So here's the shot. The focus does pulse at a few points, which you can see if we zoom in, but for me, this worked out pretty good. Okay, let's move back to the GH5. This is a post-wedding shoot, meaning we are doing the shoot after the actual wedding that will be used for the wedding film. I like to do these a lot, as I do a lot of wedding concept films where we do scripted scenes that will be added to the couple's final film. Anyway, my daughter is on the GH5 getting some BTS. For me, thank you, princess. I just set her autofocus to one area autofocus, and by the way, she's not a filmmaker. I should have set her ISO to auto, but I didn't, so excuse me guys for some of the overexposed BTS shots, but I still appreciate your help, princess. Anyway, in this first shot, I'm using the tracking AF mode to try to track the client's watch. It loses it a few times and I have to click back on the screen on the watch, but for the most part, it did okay. Again, for interviews, I'm pretty much going to be using manual focus. And in this case, my client wasn't going to be moving around much, but for you guys, I decided to use a little bit of autofocus when we're almost done for the last question. So I switched to one area autofocus, and I think it worked out pretty well. So you can't tell from this shot, but I'm pretty far away, and I'm using the Lumix 35 to 100mm.
Already doing, and just having children.
Maybe you guys don't film weddings, but you film live events or performances. So I think these reception shots should be a good test for whatever you're throwing at the camera. For these shots, I'm filming in 4K at 60p via the Ninja 5. I have the AF AE lock set to near, and for the AF mode, I have it set to one area. I made the area pretty big and kept it in the center. In this shot, I'm moving pretty fast while the guests are dancing, and at some points the autofocus gets completely confused and I have to hit the shutter button to bring everything back into focus. But for the most part, the focus does stay focused on whatever is in the center frame. For this shot, I switched to the updated face, eye, body, and animal detection focus mode. I'm actually going to play this back at 40% to see how it looks when the focus switches subjects in slow-mo. For the band's performance, I decided to leave it on face, eye, body, and animal detection focus mode. That's a mouthful. When someone is really close to the camera, about 1 to 2 feet, it did have some trouble staying focused in this mode. But for the stage shots, where they were more than 4 feet away from me, it worked out pretty well. But it does seldomly go in and out, but it seemed to bounce back pretty quickly.
People saw it, jump on it, jump on it, jump on it. Cluster, jump on it, jump on it, jump on it. Apache, jump on it, jump on it, jump on it. Oh! Hoorah, hoorah, hoorah. Hey, well, I'm Big Bang. I am the chief. I got a lot of raps, but I'll be brief. I'm never gonna walk cause I like to chill when I drive up in my new Seville. But I went down in Hall of Fame cause I'm the one that shot Jesse James. Pound for pound, I don't mess around. Big Bang, yes sir, I'm the best in town. Ho, ho, ho. This dance is just for the sexy people. Come on, Tonto, jump on it. Jump on it, jump on it. People saw it, jump on it, jump on it, jump on it. Cluster, jump on it, jump on it, jump on it.
Okay, let's go back to the GH5. For this project, I was filming some BTS for a photographer with the GH5. For these initial shots, I wanted to keep a good distance away so I wouldn't interrupt the consult. So I was using the Lumix 25mm and the Lumix 35 to 100mm. For most of these shots, I would hit the shutter button when I wanted the camera to focus right away. Now we'll use the GH5S for an outdoor shoot. So I did the first few shots using manual focus, and then for the last shot, I decided to do an autofocus test using one area focus. For this shot, I used the autofocus tracking mode, and I put the box right on my client's face, and as you guys can see, it totally failed once he walked into the shadows. So I'm gonna say this again, I think manual focus is way much safer approach to shooting. So if you guys are not comfortable using manual focus at a paid event, I would just do some practice in your backyard on the weekends, or go to the park with your kids and just practice manual focus. Let's look at another shot. For this shot here, I used the AF mode tracking again, and I put the tracking box on my client's face, and I did have my AF on set to far, as I wanted my subject to definitely be in focus when she was further away from me. I do think that the updates for the GH5S and GH5 really improved the autofocus for both cameras. And I love that Panasonic is still trying to improve the cameras that are now over 2 years old. I just don't think that these cameras are for you if you are buying a camera where having a consistent autofocus is high on your list of must-haves. In certain scenarios, the autofocus on both cameras will definitely work, but it will also fail you in certain scenarios as well. Listen guys, the GH5 and GH5S are fantastic cameras, and if you are willing to work on your skills using manual focus, I think you will love these cameras. So this was the realest of the real world tests that I can think of to do for you guys, and I have a lot more coming. So please consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys next week.
Seen a lot of girls in this so well. If I touch one, that meant nothing, girl. Hey, here I am, signed, sealed. baby, I'm yours. Hey, hey, yeah. Oh, when baby set my soul on fire, 'cause you